Who don't know me, my name's Stephanie. I am the founder of the Detroit Writing Room in downtown Detroit, and also director of our nonprofit arm, Coach Detroit Forward. I am excited to have you all here tonight for our August book club. I don't know how it's already August and the summer is basically over like today, in my opinion. But welcome back, everybody. I'm excited to have you here to meet author Amy Haimerl. She's also a journalist and a professor at Michigan State University and founder of the Shady Ladies Literary Society. And there's so many amazing things. I'm just very excited for you all to meet her. So, Amy, without further ado, the Zoom screen is all yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for everybody coming and wanting to talk about this tonight. It's sort of odd for me to talk about Detroit Hustle because it came out 5 or 6 years ago. I actually can't remember what year it came out, maybe 2016. I feel like our world has changed so dramatically. And even how I would talk about the book when it came out then to how I think I want to talk about it now has changed pretty dramatically. So I'll just give you, so for those of you who haven't read it, I'll just kind of give you the quick synopsis so we're all working from some similar information. My husband and I moved to Michigan. We were in Ann Arbor in 2012 because I got the Knight Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan, which is sort of, I liken it to like, I don't know, the golden ticket of the adult world. It takes a dozen mid-career journalists per year, brings them into the university and lets them study whatever they want and do international travel and pays them. And for a girl who grew up in a trailer in rural Colorado and who's the only one in her family to ever go to college, it was a really big deal to get invited someplace like University of Michigan to be able to go and study. And then also, we'll just be honest, like make more money than anybody in my family's ever made. So I was like, I don't know what this is happening, but it's amazing. But what I wanted to study while I was there was I was kind of noodling around the edges of what we would probably now be thinking about in terms of who was a voter for President Trump, and the idea of who was disenfranchised, what was happening in the world, what were we going to do with people who weren't in what I was kind of thinking about as winner cities. So that was going to be in LA, and New York, the coastal places where the jobs were happening. What was going to happen to people like my family? What was going to happen to my brother, who is a diesel mechanic and his engines are changing? He's going to sort of get shifted off, off of his trajectory. But we didn't really have language for it. But so I spent that year thinking about it and thinking about the city of Detroit. And my husband and I started going into Detroit a little bit when I was in Ann Arbor. And I was always surprised how little connection there was between the two places in 2012. And I always get a lot of blowback about this, but I'm pretty honest. I really hate Ann Arbor. I really, really hate it there. And I don't know how much it's because of Ann Arbor itself and how much it's because I was coming from a very tight-knit community in Brooklyn where I knew everybody. We were incredibly connected. And so nothing was probably going to be that again. And so anywhere we landed first, maybe I would have hated, I don't know. But we felt very untethered in Ann Arbor, but we felt very connected and very tethered to Detroit. And that was all about the people in the city and sort of being really warm and welcoming in a way that I don't know if it's we didn't expect, or we found places like what they call in sort of urban planning ideas of third places where you can sort of go and be a part of a community. We found that in a number of places. And so we really started enjoying it here. At the same time, the narrative about Detroit had been so negative, right? Like even people in my fellowship who grew up here were like, no, you can't go to Detroit by yourself. Tell me what routes you're going to take so that I can make sure if you get murdered that we're going to be able to be there for you. And so that kind of narrative constantly coming at you, coming from another place, starts to create a veil of anxiety and insecurity that, like, for the love of God, I should have known better. Like, I lived in Brooklyn, I've been around the country, I travel by myself, like every place in the world, people are loving, living, leading their lives. Like, yes, there's danger everywhere, but I was not walking into, Detroit was not a war zone. But when we first started coming in, there was that sort of anxiety coming about it. So thinking about as our program was ending and we had to figure out what was our next plan, I wasn't at first thinking that Detroit was part of that plan. My husband actually sort of fell for Detroit before I did. I had 2 job offers, one in Detroit with Cindy, and one in Oakland, California, to be an editor-in-chief of a newspaper out in Oakland. And it was a hard choice, but eventually we did decide to come. We came to Detroit, and part of that was like, okay, the obvious arrogance or privilege that it comes with to be able to say I can come with my education, my Brooklyn salary, and I was not making it Crane's Detroit business where I worked what I made in New York, but equivalency with the cost of living and things, and we could, in a way that growing up in Colorado, because I'm originally from rural Colorado and I lived in Denver and watched my friends there and myself all get priced out of Denver by people coming in from LA in the 90s and 2000s because they had access to capital and come in. And it's like I could understand the dichotomy of like I am now doing this to a new place. So I started noodling on like, okay, I'd been noodling around what does it mean to be disenfranchised? What do we do with people? But I also was starting to think about, and didn't know it at the time, that what I was really asking is what does it mean to belong somewhere? What does it mean to be of a place, from a place? Can you choose a place? Who gets to be an us? Who's a them? How do we other people and how do we bring them into the circle? And I don't think I knew when I started writing the book, which became about us buying this historic home in Detroit. You know, when we bought it, I call it in the book 35,000 square feet of fucked upness, because that's just what it is. It had no windows, no water, no plumbing, no electricity. It's on a very beautiful block, Van Dyke Place, here in the West Village, with very stable neighbors, wonderful community. And so we decide to buy this house, and part of the book is like, okay, how do you decide to come to a place? How do you decide to then invest your life savings in it? Because it turns out rehabbing property is a lot more expensive than you might think. Go figure. We thought like we'd be able to do it, with $100,000, and you're talking about a 3,000 square foot home in a historic district that needs all of its windows and it needs all of its systems. Like we wound up spending significantly more than that, and you would never see it because it's all behind the walls. Like I didn't even get to go get like marble countertops and be like, I'm getting that gold toilet like Jamie Dimon. No, I was like, I just get plumbing. Sweet. But so while we're going through this, Detroit is also going through bankruptcy. And so part of the book is interweaving the two stories of what we're going through trying to rehab the house with what's happening with the municipal bankruptcy. And so one of the things I kind of been thinking about and talking about more now is sort of what I wish I had known when I was writing the book. I will just straight up say like that I wrote a book proposal and pitched it to an agent, because that's how you sell a nonfiction book proposal. If you want to write a nonfiction book, you have to write a proposal, and then you pitch it to agents, and ideally an agent signs you, and then they send it out to publishers to purchase your book or not. And I will own that I felt like I had this story to tell. People were interested. Detroit was hot at the time. And for a career perspective, I was now in Detroit, not in New York, and the media world is still incredibly New York centric. And I needed to do something, and I felt like I had the story, and there hadn't really been very many women's voices out there about Detroit. Historically, they had been a Charlie LaDuff, and I've liked Charlie's books, or a Mark Benelli, or history, but very few women's voices. And I was like, I'm gonna own the fact that I want to write about this. But I had no idea how to write a book. I had never written a book. I didn't know anybody had written a book. And so I get an agent. She sends it out. We get a publisher who's interested, and they ask me if I can write the book in 90 days. I am the queen of like, well, do what has to get done, because that's what my daddy taught me. You just do what you got to do. And I don't know how to write a book. So what do? I go to the library and I'm like, how to write a book. And what are you going to say? Like, you've purposely asked for this. You feel like you need it in your career. I'm a newswoman, so that means deadlines are important and news hooks. And so I was like, I got to hit while the iron's hot. We got to do this now. I mean, I'm like pitching a book about what's going on, like about building a life in Detroit when I've been there for like 82 seconds, right? The city's just entered bankruptcy. I don't know how it ends because we're not even through anything yet. But there was so much urgency felt that I said yes. And so the thing I have learned, because I also now teach feature writing and memoir, is, and I sort of note at the time, memoir has to be about bigger themes, right? It's not just a TikTok of here's what happened. That's a breaking news story. You have to sort of know what is the bigger narrative that you're trying, that all of these parts of the story add up to. Otherwise, you're just telling all of them and you don't know how the puzzle fits together. And really, I didn't know that what I was trying to write about was belonging. That has come to my realization later. I was the journalist writing this book. So I can look back on my book and say, thank you to all of you who've read it and thank you for liking it. I can look back on it and see a writer who was at the beginning, and I'll be generous with myself and say I did the best I could, but also I can see where I struggle, which was I wish that I had known that what my theme was about belonging, because I would have been able to bring in the stories of Detroiters in a better way. I feel like I was a little ham-fisted in the book and name droppy in places in a way that didn't give people their due of why they were important, but I hadn't quite gotten to the bottom of that. So I'll tell you a funny story. So, right, I'm writing my book in 90 days. Can you write a book in 90 days? Sure, let's write a book in 90 days. I get about 8 chapters in and they end up firing my editor. So now I don't have an editor, but that gets me a delay. Woohoo, no editor, but also no delay. And the thing, if you're getting your book published, is if you don't have an editor assigned to you at your publisher, you basically fall between the cracks and nobody's paying attention to you. So they bring in a freelance editor, and because nobody's really paying attention to me, they start like randomly sending me their proposed covers, but I don't know, like, I am a first-time author. I am trying to be a good girl. So my instinct is always to try to never be a problem, never cause problems. And this is, you will see the cover of my book. I don't love this cover, but this was significantly better than the cover, which was originally a photo of a dilapidated, rundown house that was not mine. Somebody else's rundown, dilapidated house with a rainbow going across it. And I was like, I know enough about Detroit to know that I will actually get murdered. I will finally actually be murdered in the streets if this cover comes out. And so I pushed back, and this is what we came up with. But the publishers at the time said the reason they didn't want to use my house was because my house looked too nice. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, because it goes back to those same ideas of what is the narrative about Detroit and who's getting to tell the stories, who has the right to the stories. And I try to talk about it in my book and own, like, I am a newcomer white woman with access to resources who's getting to tell this story. It's a very different story than a lot of others who should be, and yet are not elevated into those positions to tell it. But part of that reason of, like, why am I, as a white woman, newcomer white woman to Detroit, able to tell it, is because it fits in with a narrative of, like, oh, it's the $1 house, it's cheap, it's this dilapidated place, it is the Wild West. And so part of the book is trying to push back against that idea of this being a place to imprint upon. Rather, I say it's a place that should be imprinting upon you, right? It's not my job to come in and change the place anymore. Like, that my family's in Montana now. So my mom's side homesteaded Colorado, my dad's side homesteaded Montana. So between the two states, I'm 6 generations deep in the West. Nobody has left, right? Like, it's very weird to find me in the Midwest. But so right now, people coming into Montana with their money from, wherever, because they have high, good tech jobs and want to buy all the land and then not use it for ranching or do it for hobby farms, and people who actually need to run ag have no place to live, like newcomers expecting it to be leisure land rather than ag land. So I'm very thoughtful about like watching, I call it in my book a chapter on what I call gentrified gentrifier. So I feel like my family's being gentrified out of the West, as I rightfully could have been called a gentrifier into Detroit. And the other piece I've realized is, after we write a book, right? Like, I made my husband, who's known as Lovey in the book, I made my husband the hero of the book. I am not the hero. I am the guide, but Lovey is the hero. Everybody loves Lovey. So I put myself out there. I asked for a book. I wrote the book. I did this, but he didn't, right? He didn't write the book. He didn't do that. So I really wanted to make sure whatever the reaction was really thoughtful and sensitive to him, and that he wasn't taking heat off of, my choices. And I think mostly that came to be. I got a lot of feedback that on the page I sound smug. And I've had to think about a lot of like, what is the voice in your own head as a writer versus what is the voice that may be coming out on the page. And with more time and a dedicated editor, I feel like I would have been able to master that a little bit better. But I also would have been able to just decide that what I needed to do, either if I'd given myself more time, I probably could have come to the idea that this was a book about belonging. And if I'd given myself more courage, I would have fought back for a better cover, and I would have fought back for the title that I probably should have just owned, right? If people are going to call me, in which I've been called all kinds of things since writing this book, if I'm going to take the hits and get called gentrifier after it, fairly, that's like all fair criticism I want to talk about. I wish I'd just gone out hard and been prepared to have those conversations up front, rather than thinking I was inoculating myself in the pages. And so I would have had a book that said Detroit Hustle, Memoir of a Reluctant Gentrifier. I would have just thrown down and said, all right, come at me, let's have this conversation, because I would have also been able to write the book in a different way. I think I was trying to appease a lot of people and a lot of voices around me in the writing of it, and trying to figure out family, husband, Detroit friends, Detroit life, career, New York view, my marketing team, what they wanted. My marketing team was like, can't we just have you going to Detroit, rehabbing this house and telling us how you're saving Detroit? And I was like, no, def not. That would be bad. That is not the case. I was like, the people who are saving Detroit are the ones who have lived in the city and like fought through it and been through it, all the hardships. And so I want to reiterate how deeply grateful I am to those of you who've read the book and liked it. And I appreciate that feedback, because I do like my book too. I also feel like I've just grown a lot as a writer, and I like to talk about how it changes and sort of the postpartum in many ways that comes after writing a book. And I've talked to a lot of writers about it. And there's this like deep urgency to get this book out. And then there's nothing. You get it out, you do some, like, I was so blessed to get to do, some book tour and things like that. But my publisher invested very little. I threw my own book party in New York and Detroit. My publisher, like, I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get flowers. They did nothing. And so it's like all of this urgency, and it feels like the most important thing in the world to you. And then it's just radio silence. Like, I've heard this from other writers who are very high profile too, that especially their first couple of books, you get your PR person from your publisher for maybe 30 days, and then they're on to the next thing. So if you don't know to already have like booked your own PR agent to be getting, coverage, you're behind, and you need to have done that 6 months to a year before the book comes out. And so I learned a lot, and I also learned that I'm fairly thin-skinned, and that I've spent, 16 to 2021 fairly silent. 16 sort of, I like dropped off Twitter. I didn't know how to engage in the conversation, and it felt really raw to me as a human about the book. Even like good comments felt like, oh, like, I feel like as a human, I'm just somebody who's like, good comments don't mean anything, but some random stranger that I don't know in the world who's like, she's so smug. I was like in tears for days being like, I'm the worst smug human ever. And so I've been having to think about how as a writer do we put ourselves out into the world and make space for our writing, and also keep space to be able to engage with good and fair criticism, and not let random strangers suddenly start to define your own sense of worth. And so that's part of the reason why I started the Shady Ladies Literary Society, I think, because I wanted to help others, but particularly women writers who were writing their first and second books, have a fun outlet to come here. A, they would get to see Detroit and maybe see it in a different narrative. And B, have a really warm, welcoming, and supportive environment where maybe when they're going through the hardship, or somebody's calling them smug on Goodreads, man, people should be nicer on Goodreads. I feel like we should do, instead of, what is it, Jimmy Kimmel's mean tweets, I feel like there'd be a really funny skit about like authors read their Goodreads reviews. Like somebody should read like Toni Morrison's Goodreads reviews, and you just have to feel better about yourself, because I'm like, dude, who says that about Sula? Gee. But yeah, it's just like we don't get training on how to have those conversations. So I wanted to create that space for women authors, and also see about how I could do some of that training for them. So I did some of that work behind the scenes of how do you do a book tour? How do you engage with that? How do you engage with social media? But I pretty much shut down all of my own writing. I really hadn't done anything. And then I got lucky that the pandemic hit. And my other main thing that I do is I'm a small business writer. That's what I did for Cranes. I love covering small business. And the New York Times called. It's a former editor of mine from CNN, is now at the New York Times. And he was like, we need help covering small business. Do you want to jump in on this? And I was like, yes. So I sort of put Shady Ladies aside, because that wasn't, I don't know how to do live events in the middle of a pandemic. And God bless Stephanie, like keeping Writing Room going and virtual and making that work. But being able to write again for the Times, it's pretty straightforward business stories, but it gave me sort of a little bit of confidence on the page again. And I started writing again. And then I got an opportunity to do this new newsletter, which is called Bar Heart. Facebook approached me. They're doing this new newsletter platform, and I think they've launched about 30 of us at this point. And so I'd write a weekly, it will be weekly, I'm still getting my feet under me, newsletter about what it means to belong in America. And what I mean by that is like telling the stories of the places and people who define us, their reported, their essays. It's sort of trying to interrogate all the ideas I was trying to write about in Detroit Hustle, but on a broader scale in geography, and a more narrow scale and scope, understanding now that what I fundamentally care about is what does it mean to belong? And that is sort of the animating question probably for most of my work. So that's how those two things tie together. And then, we're still here. Next year will be a decade in Detroit, and a lot of people we've known, a lot of people who had some things to say, are not here anymore, right? And we're still here. And I feel like sometimes that's the work, right? You just stay and keep doing the work every single day. And that's by the work, I just mean like trying to build a life in a city that we really enjoy, and grapple with the hardship, be a part of supporting and uplifting voices here, and telling the stories. So that is it's 7:30. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So that's sort of my long-winded, like, I wrote a book. It might suck, but it might be okay. There's some things I learned. You should write a book too. If you do that, you'll probably like it. You might also feel like it sucks. Don't worry. It'll be normal.
Well,